This episode is brought to you by Waypoint. Waypoint is way more than a website. With one upload, producers can get their shows on 10 different devices, including Amazon Fire TV, Roku, Samsung TV, Android TVs, Apple TV, Xbox, LG TVs, Chromecast, as well as mobile apps in the Apple and Android store. Waypoint has over 2,000 episodes and 70 different producers, and there is just so much content available now. And they're adding more every day. Sometimes when I find myself having a little time, I want to watch something, I'll sit down in front of Waypoint or in front of Netflix, and I'll be basically overwhelmed with the amount of content that's available. And I find myself just scrolling through, looking for something, not sure what I want to watch right then. And I spend all my time scrolling through. Waypoint, they can sympathize with that. I guess they do the same thing because they just put in this live feature where you can just go and click the live feed, and new shows will just start scrolling through. So you can have this on while you're cleaning your guns or you're respooling your reels like I do, and you can discover new shows. You can see some of your favorite old shows, and you don't have to think about it. You just click live. You can have it on. If you own a sports bar, it's a great way to do it too. Doctor's office, anything like that, you can click the live feed, and all these family-friendly outdoor shows will come on, and it'll just play over and over and over again without anyone having to do anything. So if you find yourself with an extra 50,000 hours of time, rest assured, you won't be able to finish it all on Waypoint. They have that much content. Can you believe that? 50,000 hours plus of content. That's amazing. All right, you can go to waypointtv.com, or you can search for it in the app store of your choosing to install it on the device of your choice and watch for free.
In my whole career, almost 100% of it, I have gone to work at 7 o'clock in the morning or earlier, and at least half the days, and it was like every other day for a lot of time, got home between 10 and midnight and just thrived on it. I mean, what could be better than going fishing? This is Captain Bouncer Smith, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
That was Captain Bouncer Smith of Miami, and man, he is one of the true legends in the sport of fishing. You know, Bouncer, I've known about this guy for a long time, and it was such a pleasure to sit down with him and learn his story. I mean, from a very young age, Bouncer has been a fishing fool, fishing fanatic, leaving the house at 4 o'clock in the morning on his bicycle. He got his first job at 14 working on a charter boat. When he was 15, he goes down to Islamorada, sees the world-famous flats guides working out of Bud Mary's, and decides that that's going to be what he's going to do. He is going to become one of those guides. And so he goes back, continues to work on head boats and charter boats until he actually did make that dream a reality and went down to Islamorada and became a flats guide at Bud and Mary's. He was really nice to welcome me into his home, and we sat down for an unhurried conversation. He told fish stories. He told stories about his childhood, about growing up in Miami when sand would cover the paved roads and there were sea oats all over Hallandale. He just has a lot of good stories, including one with world famous and world record holder Marty Arostegui. And Marty has many, many world records, more world records than any other angler. And with Bouncer, he set many of those records, but he also had what Bouncer calls the greatest angling accomplishment of all time, and that is catching a swordfish on fly. And he tells that story about how they did it, and he humbly tells the story of why he thinks it's the greatest accomplishment, because he maintains that he had very little to do with it. And it's a very interesting story. And I tell you that because this is a kind of a funny podcast. Also, if you know about Bouncer, you may know that he has a strong aversion to bananas. He has a lot of superstitions. One of them is that bananas on a boat are bad luck. He doesn't allow banana boat sunscreen. He may cut the tag out of your Fruit of the Loom underwear when it still had a banana on the label, and really, truly believes that bananas are bad luck and does not allow them on his boat. I guess he's got some funny superstitions or some funny kind of thing going on there, because this was episode, well, I've done about 40 podcasts now, and I have never had a problem with the card. I've never had a problem with the recorder. I've never had a problem with the video. And man, on this one, we had a problem with all three. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. We get there and we are deep into the interview, and the card fills up. So I've never had that happen. I've been able to fit multiple podcasts on a card. Anyway, the card fills up and I have to change the card. So we get back and we start talking again. And then the batteries in the recorder die, which has never happened. And I changed the batteries before. So I don't know what happened there, but I'm going to make sure it never happens again, because one of the things that happens when the batteries in the recorder die is that the file is saved, but it's compromised. And we were able to salvage the file. And you can hear what he's saying, but it is obviously not the quality that the rest of the podcast was, and I apologize for that. If it wasn't at such a critical point in the show, I would probably just delete all of this, because quality in the podcast is super important to me. I don't like listening to podcasts with poor quality. But I was asking Bouncer about two really important things. One being his opinion on where we stand with Goliath Grouper, and if there needs to be a season open on them. I was very curious to hear what he had to say about that. And then also, he is well known for being able to go out and catch these giant Cubera snappers. And so we were talking about that, and he moved into introducing this story about Marty Arostegui catching a swordfish on fly. And then the batteries died. So there's about almost 20 minutes of this podcast has really poor audio, the worst audio that has ever appeared on this show. So I really apologize for that, but I think that at the point of that happening, if you're still there and you're still listening, I believe you're going to be deeply engaged in what he has to say, and you're going to kind of have to suffer through some of this poor audio just so you can hear what he has to say, and also introduce this story about the swordfish on fly. So I apologize for that. The third thing that happened is when I went back to the camera, it was also dead. So 3 things that have never happened before all happened in the same podcast. So hopefully I cleared all those out and we won't have any other issues. But I love this podcast and being able to sit down with Bouncer. This is what all of these podcasts are really about for me, is being able to go to sit down with somebody that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, or I'm just really super intrigued by what they've been doing. And that's what it's all about. I get to sit down with these people and ask them pretty much anything I wanted to. Bouncer was awesome. I loved it, and I can promise you that it won't be the last one with him, because he is remarkable. He has a work ethic like I've never seen before, and he can talk. He likes to talk, and he's very entertaining, and he's just the most wonderful guy. I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast with Bouncer Smith. I'm sitting here with one of the true legends of sport fishing, Bouncer Smith, and I really appreciate you sitting down with me, man. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, Tom. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I started guiding in the early 90s in Key West, and there was a short list of people that I paid attention to. Steve Huff, Harry Spear, Robert Trossett, Ralph Delph down in that area. And then I always heard these names from Miami, Bouncer Smith being one of them. And if I saw an article, if I saw a DVD that you had done, I paid attention to it, and there was a lot of good information. So I'm really excited to be sitting here with you and to learn a lot more about your story. You are a legend of legends. I'm going to read this off of, this actually comes off your website, but just to give people an idea of Bouncer's accomplishments here. Billfish Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015, Guy Harvey Outpost Bonfire Tournament, you win that. You've won all kinds of Yamaha Contender Miami Billfish tournaments. In 2014, you had a really good year. Your International Game Fish Association inducted into the legendary Captains and Crew. You have tagging awards from the Billfish Foundation, tagging awards for Dolphin. You have so many tournaments on here that you have done very well in or won. Lots of stuff with the Met, top offshore captain, on and on and on down. I mean, I'm just scrolling down. I don't think that your website or another website could really put your career into one page. But 11 world records caught on fly, and that was
in one day, yeah.
It really?
Yeah.
In one day?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll have to talk about that. 50 world records as of this year. Do you have more now?
Yeah, we're up to 70.
70? Okay, that's excellent. And then one that we're going to talk about, too, is a swordfish on fly, which I'm very interested in hearing about. The Hyman Award, that's what is that award?
That's was given by the Met Fishing Tournament for over 30 years, and it was awarded to people who did the most to promote fishing in South Florida. It was a real honor to get that. It was right up there with the legendary Captains and Crews and the Lifetime Achievement from the Billfish Foundation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's quite a career. That's quite a career, and I'm sure that all of those accomplishments are not all of what you've been done. It looks like that may not have been updated. You've got 20 more world records since then and probably many other awards. But how did this all get started for you?
My dad was an avid outdoorsman. It didn't matter whether he was catching butterflies, collecting walnuts, fly fishing for trout, or hunting deer with a bow and arrow. We lived in Michigan, and if it was outdoors, he did it. And he instilled that in all four of his kids. I have two sisters and a brother. And we were fishing, snorkeling. We had one scuba tank that everybody passed around. We'd go to the west coast of Florida. Back in the days when you drove right onto the beach in Marco and Sanibel, and we would hike the beaches all day, collecting seashells, casting in the surf for trout and snook, and we were a very devoted outdoor family. It was a strict line of program, though. Dad worked 5 days a week. There was home and garden maintenance 1 day a week and 1 day for the outdoors. And we really took advantage of it. He really got us headed in the right direction.
What was the connection to Florida?
In 1955, just about Christmas time, he was offered an opportunity, all expenses paid, to move to Miami, Florida from Pontiac, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit. And I don't want to say that he just took it in a hurry, the offer, but I got double-bladed skates for Christmas, and my older sister got her first boot skates, or, high-top skates for Christmas, and we were in the car moving to Florida on January 6th.
and back then, that was probably way before there was a hockey team in Florida. Probably not too much chance of using those.
There were no teams in Florida. There were no roads in Florida.
Yeah, that is quite a different world. That's probably before spraying for mosquitoes, right?
I don't remember them spraying for mosquitoes. There was no air conditioning. It was
Florida was the wilderness.
My older sister and I, we compare our lives to Hollandale and Hollywood Beach. When we moved to Florida, the beach north of Hollandale Beach Boulevard was our beach. It was the paved road was covered with beach sand, and it was all sea oats, and you drove into a pocket in the sea oats. That was a parking lot. Space would be a better description. There was a swing bridge at Hollandale Beach Boulevard and a lagoon with water skiing on the north side of Hollandale Beach Boulevard, west of the Intercoastal Waterway. Then they tore down the swing bridge, built a drawbridge, built the Diplomat Hotel on our beach, and filled in that lagoon and put a big department store. And since then, they've torn down that drawbridge, built a bigger drawbridge, and tore down the Diplomat and built a bigger Diplomat. And there's no sea oats in Hollandale or Hollywood Beach today.
Everything's changed. I mean, you've seen so much changes with this whole area and the fishing, I'm sure.
Oh, we've been here through the best of times for Florida. We've been here through the worst, major hurricanes and the Mariel boat lift and riots and everything else, but it's just such a great place to live. You know, you're in South Florida.
Yeah.
I mean, you live down there where you have to drive a long way to get to go to a big department store, but South Florida, we have the greatest climate. We got great fishing. And now in Miami, we have opera theaters and major sport teams on almost every type of team there is. So not much to ask for down here.
Yeah. Well, you're living in a really beautiful place. We're sitting here looking out over the city and over the ocean, and you've got your boat down here at the dock.
Right out back at Miami Beach Marina.
Right out back, and that's Bouncer's Dusky. You've been in a Dusky for a long time, right?
It's an interesting story. I was doing a lot of advertising in the tackle shops around South Florida that I was available to hire to teach you how to fish on your boat. And I got a phone call from a guy from New York. He was taking delivery of a boat on December 22nd, and he wanted me to run it the 23rd, the 26th, 28th, 30th, and then January 2nd and 4th. And then he would go north, and he would see how we had worked out. And he wanted to fish for tarpon and sailfish. I said that was right up my alley. We went to the Dusky. He had me meet him at Dusky Marine on the 22nd. At 2 p.m, I says, how will I recognize you? He says, well, I'll be driving a yellow Rolls Royce. And he says, how will I recognize you? I says, I'll be the biggest guy in the parking lot. And we hit it off really good. We took delivery of the boat that afternoon. I took it to an in-house storage place. He met me at the storage place. And we went fishing the next day. We caught a big blackfin tuna about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was 25-foot boat, and it was 6-foot seas. He says, well, how do you like my boat? And I says, I want right of first refusal to buy it if you ever want to sell it. I bought the boat 18 months later. He called me up. He says, I have to sell the boat for business reasons. I says, I don't have any money saved up. He says, give me $400 and take me for half price. And we did that for over 20 years.
Nice.
I bought an 18-month-old, beautiful 25.5-foot Dusky with an Evinrude on it for $400. and it was in and out storage, and he fished probably at that time a total of 6 weeks through 24 days the boat had been used.
And you were on it probably all 24
I ran
days.
It all 24 days. Yeah. That's right.
That's awesome. How do you have such a good memory? That is a long time ago, and you remember the exact dates. Do you have a photographic memory for things like that?
Not like my father had, but pretty good at remember fishing stuff. Don't ask me to remember somebody's name.
I know. I can remember things like that are associated with fishing, or things that I'm really interested in, or I see somebody that I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm like, I remember that day you caught a 24-pound permit at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they're just floored that I can remember those kind of things. But I can barely remember somebody's name from yesterday. But there's certain fishing details that I can remember very well. But I'm really surprised that you knew those dates, exactly how you were going to take the days off. I would have just said, oh, he was going to fish a few days, but you remembered that exactly.
One little tip I'll give you, because I can't remember people's names for 5 minutes. People get a kick out of every day. They get on board the boat, and I have a pencil in my hand, and right there on my fiberglass console, I write down each person's name and the identifying thing that they're wearing. So, like, Joe will be a blue, which means he's wearing a blue shirt, and Tom will be a black shirt, and Mary will be a green blouse, or she might be the only lady, and right. I won't have to make a note of what she's wearing. But the bottom line is that story, like with the Dusky, you're a charter boatman. You have to entertain people when the fish aren't biting. Well, they want to hear fishing stories, or they want to know how you came to own a boat and stuff like that. So they get repeated a lot.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story. So how did you become a guide? Like, when did you move to Florida yourself? Like, your dad brought you down here, and you were spending all that time. Then he moves, as like you said, for a job. But then, how old were you at that point? When
7 years old.
Okay, so you're 7.
2nd grade.
And then fishing is just part of your life every day. That's just that's kind of what there was to do, I'm assuming.
You hear stories all the time about the good old days. Like I saw somebody on TV yesterday that said that they were kicked out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning when they were kids, and they were told they had to be home by dark, and mom would go out and ring a bell on the front patio to tell them it was time to come home. Well, in our house, out of the house as early as we could. I've been known to leave the house when I was on a bicycle at 4 a.m. to ride over to the fishing piers. But my mother would go out on the front porch and blow a conch-horn every afternoon from over by Joe Robbie Stadium or whatever it's called now, but the Dolphin Stadium. But we lived right over by the stadium, and she would blow a conch-horn when it was dinner time. But other than that, the parents kicked you out of the house in the morning, and they expected you back in the afternoon. I had one strict rule. I had to take care of my little brother. So when I went fishing, he went fishing. When I went exploring, he went exploring. But we moved down here in 1956, 7 years old, went to Norland Elementary, went to Norland Junior High, went to Norland Senior High, went to Miami-Dade Community College, which then was a junior college, and my dream, I went to Isla Mirada when I was probably 15, and I saw all these muscular fishermen, all with raccoon eyes, and telling tales about their days on the water. And I was already an avid fisherman. I said, that's what I'm going to do when I become an adult. I'm going to be a flats guide in Isla Mirada.
And how old were you when you saw that for the first time and you determined that was a thing that you wanted to do?
Probably 15.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I graduated from high school, went to college for a semester. I had already worked on the fishing pier when I was 14, worked on head boats when I was 15, worked on charter boats let me back up a little bit. Graduated from high school, went right to work on a head boat at Pier 5. And I worked nights. A guy came down one afternoon. He says, "You boys that work on here, you know how to wrap wire?" "Of course we know how to wrap wire. What kind of a question is that?" Tommy Silvano who was interrogating me. He says, "Can you gaff a fish?" "Of course we gaff fish every day." "Anybody want to work tomorrow?" I says, "I'll work tomorrow." And from that day on, which I graduated from high school in June, and I was working on the hub boat from June. This was early September. And that afternoon, I took the job as a charter boat mate. And then I worked from 5 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. on a head boat. And I worked on a charter boat from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, except for Monday. And Sunday night, we'd get done on the head boat, and we would drive to the Keys and fish off the bridges till 10 o'clock in the morning, go home and get some sleep to get started on the drill for Monday night. So,
man, you learned how to live without much sleep, and that's a lot of fishing.
Tom, in my whole career, almost 100% of it, I have gone to work at 7 o'clock in the morning or earlier. And at least half the days, and it was like every other day for a lot of time, got home between 10 and midnight and just thrived on it. I mean, what could be better than going fishing?
That's amazing that you can live on such little sleep.
Well, that's just the way I am. So.
Yeah. And so you're fishing how many days a year?
Well, now we've really slowed down a lot. Just in the last few months, I have decided that I'm not going to fish at night much anymore. I was fishing 7 days a week and 4 nights a week for tarpon. And I've decided that we're going to pretty much stop the night tarpon fishing and not fishing Sundays anymore. I'm 70 years old, so I call that semi-retirement. I'm down to 6 days a week and only in the office for 10 hours a day. So 60, 65 hours a week. That's a pretty good retirement schedule, I think.
Yeah, that is still working more than 80% of the working fishing guides out there. That is incredible. Where do you think you got that work ethic? Is it a work ethic, or you just love fishing so much that you just can't stay away from it?
I think it's a little bit of both. We grew up in a time where we saw Dad leave at sunrise and get home at sunset. We actually endured a period where Dad actually got home from work before Mom did. Mom left at 7 in the morning, and my older sister made dinner every night for myself and my little brother and my little sister. And Mom would come in afterwards and have dinner with Dad. But my older sister made dinner every night for us because Mom was working too. So we recognized that working was something that you did. And we grew up in a time when there were times that were tough enough that we would walk the sides of the major roads collecting pop bottles to take to the grocery store to trade the pop bottles for dinner. But we also lived in some pretty good times.
Well, you had a lot of fish too, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, we had more than
no
enough
shortage of fish.
You know, that brings up a sad subject, but people today really have to understand the difference in fishing. We grew up in a time where if you caught 100 Spanish mackerel, and I caught 100 Spanish mackerel by myself from a fishing pier, no ice, threw them in a burlap bag, kept the burlap bag wet all day, and a few of them on the top were suitable for dinner. And then my dad would make me go out and dig trenches along the hibiscus hedge to use the remainders as fertilizer. But there was no such thing as throwing back fish. I am relatively proud in its own sense of an explanation of what I learned at Captain Harry's Fishing Supply. They have a slideshow going all the time. And in those slides is a picture of myself, my little brother, my little sister, my dad, the next door neighbor. And we have a conduit pipe, 12 feet long or whatever it is, covered with sea trout. And we have another one covered with redfish and a tarpon and shark jaws and jack crevalles laying on the grass in front of them. And it exemplifies where we came from. And it really legitimatizes how much I know about how much we need fishery conservation today. We went from keep them all, do something with them, but keep all of them, to catch your limit, to limit your catch. Today, you can't, if you want to see fishing in the future, you can't just arbitrarily keep anything that's legal. It just won't, the future won't sustain it. We really, really have to bite the bullet and fish with a harvest more in lines with hunting, where you only keep this kind of fish 2 months of the year, only caught by these methods. And we're lucky because fishing, we can go catch them all year round, but you got to put them back in good condition. Don't suffocate them and then throw them overboard and tell everybody we're great. Don't hold the protective service up against our shirt when we hold up a fish and say, well, we threw it back. We're great when it dies of infections a week later. It's really crazy. People catch a goggle eye, which is a bait fish, as you and I both know, and they'll not hold the rig vertical so it doesn't rub its sides on the rig, and they'll unhook it with a dehooker, and they'll use a net that actually holds water in it when they're scooping it up and putting it into a pen one at a time. And then they go out and they catch a kingfish and they hold it against their shirt to have their picture taken, or a sailfish or a snapper, and wipe all the slime off. And we have to fight sometimes with people to convince them that plucking scales off a tarpon isn't good for the tarpon. We're in a new time.
Yeah. So do you think with that new time that fishermen can rely on the authorities to make those rules for us, or we have to make those rules and enforce them ourselves as charter guides and people who are interested in fishing, people that are fishing a lot?
We definitely have to stay ahead of the times. Legislatures stay behind the times. Prime example, marine reserves are a nasty, nasty word. But the documented proof of what has happened in the Dry Tortugas Marine Reserve is phenomenal. Fisheries have spawning aggregations of mutton snappers, which leave the reserve, stick their neck out for months and come back to the reserve to spawn. The population in the reserve has exploded. Black groupers in the reserve have exploded. Everything explodes in these reserves. I saw something, I don't remember where it was the other day. It was a reserve in Mexico. and there were thousands of trevally, which is like our Jack Crevalle, in an area that was decimated by commercial fishing 30 years ago, and now it's just a cloud of spawning trevallies that's tens of thousands of fish, because this marine reserve doesn't allow any interaction with those fish other than diving down to look at them. And so marine reserves are a bad word, but we really need to push our legislature to pick a few. Don't make everything closed, but pick a few spots where a black grouper can say, "Phew, I found a place where I can grow to 50 pounds without having 20 hooks hanging from my lower jaw." Or a cloud of yellowtails can spawn. Yellowtails, to you and I, they look like they're in very good condition. Well, if you come off of Miami, they ain't what they used to be. I grew up when there were unbelievable numbers of flag yellowtails in Miami. And now, right off of Miami, if you can catch a keeper, you're doing really good. I grew up in a time when we counted our catch of mangrove snappers on a headboat by how many garbage cans we filled. And sometimes they were all 10 and 12 pounds. Today, they still do very good on mangrove snappers. They can fill 5-gallon buckets. That's a facetious thing to say, but it's the truth. We went from garbage cans to 5-gallon buckets to measure our catch.
Wow. But still, today, the fishing, when I talk to, somebody like Kenny Harris or Robert Trossett that fished in these times like you did, it was really, really good, but it's still really, really good today, don't you think?
Here's the problem with that. Yes, it's really, really good in Key West, 70 miles from the Marine Reserve. But it ain't really, really good in Miami, which was really, really good 20 years ago. Everything is withdraws to nucleus. As an example, here's a prime example of success. Good news. We don't want to make people think there's no good news in fishing. When I was graduating from high school, my focus in fishing was plug casting for snook. Me and my buddies, or my buddies and I, would race from seawall to seawall at the crack of dawn to fish zero spooks for 20, 25-pound snook and 10 and 12-pound Jack Crevalles. And we would jig all over inlet in the middle of the night from the top of the bridge for nice-sized snook. And then, so that was in the late 60s. By the 80s, no, I don't run snook charters. No, I don't snook fish myself anymore. There's just no snook left to fish for. Snook fishing was still good in Palm Beach and Jupiter and Fort Pierce, but the snook population on the east coast of Florida had withdrawn just to its healthiest nucleus, the right rivers flowing into the ocean, and everything was perfect. So the nucleus was very, very strong, but the fringe areas, there was no fishing left. Now, because of snook becoming the number one controlled fish in the state of Florida, I look forward to running a snook charter. And I take friends and family, and we go snook fish for fun and have really spectacular trips because of success stories with protecting the species. And that's a coastal species. Swordfish, I picked the worst time in the world to go to Bud and Mary's. I left for Bud and Mary's in March of 1976 from Fort Lauderdale, charter fishing, going to Bud and Mary's in 1976. And June of 1976, I went to Bud and Mary's in March. June of 1976, they, for all intents and purposes, discovered nighttime sword fishing. So right when the heyday of the nighttime fishing started, I was out of town. But I got to get in on some of it in 77 and 78, and it was really, really great.
So you're talking about Miami.
Yes.
They were discovering that. Why weren't you trying that in Alamorada?
Very hard to do on a flat skiff.
Oh, you were on a flat skiff.
Yes.
Okay, that was going to ask you if you had.
I was fulfilling that dream of being a flats guy. So. Yeah.
Boy, those days at Bud and Mary's in the 70s, that had to be.
Oh, what a place it was.
Gee, that's like Tom McGuane's 92 in the Shade in Key West. I'm sure you've read that book, but I mean, he portrays this culture of the fishing guides. I mean, those are hard men down there
Oh, yeah.
at that time. And that culture has changed a lot,
Yeah.
I would imagine. I would imagine showing up as an outsider. Well, you were somewhat of an outsider. You were a Miami guy, but still an outsider to the Keys. That had to be a little bit challenging.
I made two friends. I made two friends that were directly related to what I was doing. Sonny Fisher was the marine store and booking agent manager, and I made friends with him because I spent a lot of time sitting around at the store trying to get a charter.
Yeah.
And I made friends with a young guy named Sonny Esslinger, and he got me. He was my mentor down there. He helped me figure out where to fish, when to fish, and all that kind of stuff that I hadn't already figured out on my own before I went in business down there. And then I had chartered Ken Doubles many times, and he was still running charters there, so I knew him. And then Alex Adler became pretty friendly, but the other guides, there wasn't much going there. I mean, they didn't say good morning in the morning. They didn't say good afternoon in the evenings, but they got a little more hostile when I started fishing more night trips than anybody, because I wouldn't have anything to do all day, so I'd sit around the tackle shop answering questions for people that walked up. And when everybody else went home at 5 o'clock, I would sit around the marina and I would pick up everybody throw their fish scraps in the water. I'd go longhand on that, and I'd catch crabs for bait for tarpon fishing and permit fishing. And then people would drive in we were still on daylight savings time, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. People pull up. We were trying to find out about going fishing tomorrow. Well, I'd book charters after the store closed, because every day there were 30 flats guides, and the senior guide got the first shot at every charter that came into the office every single day. So now a lot of these guys were booked a year in advance for the prime season, but there were always a few that needed a charter the next day, and I had to wait till all of them were booked before the store would book me. So I'd sit around at night and I'd book charters for 4 or 5 days, and then I'd go home and go to bed.
Mm-hmm. So how long did it take to develop some respect from those guys? You said they got hostile when you were getting more trips at night than anyone. But was there a point when they kind of figured this guy's not going away, he seems okay, or did it remain hostile?
After a year, the majority of them were pretty nice. Yeah. Some never changed courses. I think the greatest inroad I made was being friends with Cecil Keith, because he was definitely one of the old guys.
Definitely.
And it was an honor to be recognized by him. But after a year, they all recognized that I knew how to fish. I was making plenty of great catches and having a lot of fun, and going great ways out of my way to not step on people's toes, because that's one of the big issues today. As you know, being a Keys guide, you have to recognize that a certain amount of acreage belongs to a guide who's pulled up there and started pulling for bonefish or staked up to fly fish for tarpon. He needs a certain area that's his in order to catch a fish. He can't just say, I'm putting my pole out there and waiting for a fish to bite. Those tarpon have to come down a pathway and get to his boat. He has to work his way across this flat as the bonefish are coming across the other way so they can interact. Back then, if you were out on the flats pulling for bonefish, or if you were staked up to tarpon fish, you were probably a guide. There were very few independent people. Today, I don't have to tell you, you got 50 million private boaters and then 100 million jet skis. And it's got to be, God, I don't know how you guys put up with it. I mean,
well, the jet skis, in Key West, it's not as big of a problem, because you have people, like I always thought, people are coming all the way from Miami and they're passing, Key Largo, Alamorada, Marathon, all these boat ramps they're passing, and sooner or later they just are like, well, we can't wait any longer, we got to put in, and so Key West is a longer way away, and then as you go west of Key West, you start getting out of where people are comfortable. They don't see the cruise ship anymore. They don't see, so there's a little bit of a refuge, but that I find it interesting about, that story of what you were just talking about how you really had to pay your dues and how you had to earn that respect. And even after you are fishing for a year, they're still not giving you the respect. And like when I first started guiding, whoever was first to the boat ramp and whoever was last to leave, that's who you kind of looked at and you're like, guy's still out there. Wow. He was out there yesterday. Wow. He's out there every single day last week. Wow. Finally you're kind of like, okay, that guy's putting in the time. He's putting in the time. Today it seems a little bit different with social media. Certainly who's putting in their time matters, but there are many other ways for guys to, specifically guides, to make a name for themselves. Social media is one. How do you think that's changed since you've started fishing?
Well, when I started, it was all hanging on the rail, centered around you were in a tourist center and you were asking every person that walked behind the boat, you want to go fishing tomorrow? And then when I went in business for myself in Miami, and I left Isla Morada because my wife was sick and she had a good job up here. So I moved back up to Miami and I was looking to establish myself here as an independent businessman. I started off, I had a flat skiff and I would put brochures in all the tackle shops and visit all the tackle shops that I would teach people how to fish on their own boats and have rods and reels will travel. And then I bought a bigger boat in 79 and started running charters on my own boat, a bigger, sailfish and tarpon boat instead of a tarpon and bonefish boat. I bought an ad in Florida Sportsman magazine, was my first social media. As a matter of fact, maybe it was Saltwater Sportsman first and then Florida Sportsman. But that was my social media for years, was those two magazines. When I started center console fishing, there was Ron Green in Tavernier and, oh boy, now I'm having a brain freeze. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. Two brothers in Key West. Maybe they'll come to me later, but Bob Montgomery, right? Yeah. So there was Bob Montgomery and his brother in Key West, and Ron Green in Tavernier, and my ad in Miami. Those were the three center consoles. And business was, good afternoon, Captain Bouncer. Saturday, 3 months. But I can get you out on Thursday in 2 weeks. Yeah, I'd probably be paid to take off work to fish on Thursday. Oh, good. Okay, well, we'll see you on Thursday in 2 weeks. And that's how bookings were. People changed their schedule to fish with you. Now, social media, there have been many occasions where guys have gone through social media and found pictures of their catches on somebody else's site. And sometimes it's the guy that's the best with a computer that gets the most trips. And with social media and with today's society and everything else, now I have 52 years full-time experience taking people fishing. If I'm not available on Saturday morning, they want me to tell them who to go with. And you go, do I send them to a guy I know is good, I'll never see him again, or do I let them go wander around out there and never see him again either? So it's completely changed. There's no much such thing as, well, I can't help you on Saturday. How about Thursday? You better have somebody call that wants to go fishing on Thursday.
Yeah, that was. I mean, even when I started in the early '90s, that was the way. You know, I had a voicemail with a cassette tape in the deal, and you would come home, and there would be 50 messages on the machine, and it's just, I'm so tired, I can't listen to them right now. But you also, if you got back to these people right away, they were like, ooh, he's not fishing. Like, you got back too quickly. Yeah. So there was an accepted time that, okay, they leave a message on Thursday. You don't get back to them until Monday, maybe, because you're fishing every day. And like you were talking about, you're getting home at 10, 11 o'clock at night, leaving at 5 o'clock in the morning. When are you going to call them? At 11? When's your next day off? It's going to be, in 2 weeks. So then you would start picking up the phone that whole day and get back to people.
Yeah, but I had a great business partner.
Oh, you did?
I was married to a wonderful girl. She would come home from work at 5 o'clock. and she would answer all the voicemails on the home phone. And I would get home at 10 o'clock at night, and I would sit down at the computer, and I would answer all the emails. I mean, I might be answering emails until close to midnight, but she picked up the slack with the voicemails. Within reason, not in the middle of the day, but after 5 o'clock, the quicker you got responded to people, the better your chances of getting the trip.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I can't imagine anybody wanting to wait 3 or 4 days to hear from me.
Yeah.
Maybe in the Keys, they're a little more patient with it.
It would be you would find yourself in these different situations of people looking for tarpon season or whatever, and they're calling. They know you're booked a year in advance, and they're calling and they're waiting, and they're kind of. It's funny because it was a funny little situation that fishing guides find themselves in, especially young fishing guides. Like I was 22 years old, and you have these CEOs of these companies who are not used to waiting in line.
Yeah.
And they're asking to be put on a waiting list for these days. And it's a very strange little situation because there's no other place in that guy's life that he's asking to be put on and they're even saying, well, what about extra money? Could we pay extra money and get those days? It's like, well, if I do that to this guy, then he's never coming back. So that was a funny and strange little situation. And I don't know that maybe it exists today, but with cell phones and social media, people, it's an immediate connection.
Yeah. But it is interesting. You mentioned something that really, I reflect back on it because I remember the days. You're in your 20s, and this CEO is putting his life in your hands to not only just to get him a fish, but to bring him home safe. You're a young devil-may-care. That lightning doesn't scare me. And going through Bucky's wheel ditch at 10 o'clock at night doesn't scare me. I mean, it certainly scared the CEO. And then you're an equal with your customers, and then you're older than your customers. And it's an interesting transition through the years.
Then you're fishing with your customers' kids.
Yeah.
And then they stop fishing, and you're still fishing with their kids, and maybe even they bring grandkids.
Yep.
I'm sure you've had that situation.
Oh, many times, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Where you can keep all of those people happy for all of those years, and they just become, it almost becomes like family.
If you're a success as a guide, they are far more than clients. They're friends. You know that their family has had these issues and that issues, these successes and these failures, and the mate that I have now, I call him my co-captain. He's really not my mate. A young man named A.B. Raymond. People come on the boat, and he asks how their granddaughter is. He's never met him, but he remembers their name is Chelsea or Mary or whatever. And I'm going, how does he remember the names of their grandkids that he never even met? But while we're out there fishing, the grandpa's bragging about his granddaughter, and A.B.'s able to remember what their names were. And
well, that's a sign of an excellent businessman of any kind, a great salesman or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, might have a misconception of fishing guides. Certainly, probably not the people that are listening to this podcast, but a fishing guide. I just thought, and I think that is like the best profession to learn so many communication skills.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's public speaking all day long. You're entertaining people all day long. Then you have follow-up on the emails and the phone calls. And then you have this whole preparation and having to love this process of preparation and having the boat dialed in and everything's perfect all the way. And there's a lot. I mean, and when you're a fishing guy, a one-man show, you're doing all of those things.
Sure.
And maybe you have some help with your wife or somebody that can help you a little bit. But for the most part, it's a one-man show. And if you can do that, I feel like you could pretty much handle any business.
Oh, yeah. And on top of it all, if you're a salesman, it's all yes, 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 yes. But if you're going to be a successful fishing guide, you have to figure out how you can give direct commands to a CEO.
Right.
And you were 25 years old, standing there with a push pole and trying to tell a guy the fish is at 10 o'clock, 50 feet. And if he doesn't throw at 10 o'clock, 50 feet, he might as well not throw.
Right.
And you got to do it without him getting mad at you.
And you got to do it without getting mad at him. because it's horribly frustrating at times.
It sure is. And I happen to have a voice that if I tell a guy to pump up and wind down, and I tell him in a normal voice, it sounds fine. But as soon as I get excited and I need him to wind down now, the fish just dove underneath the boat. It sounds like I'm yelling at him. Right. I'm not yelling at him. I'm only guiding him and excited. And the day I don't get excited fishing, I might as well hang it up. Because I'm still excited to go every day. I get butterflies in my stomach when we're fighting fish and everything that a newbie gets. Yeah. Just my adrenaline's a little bit more under control than theirs is.
You can see it on your face when you're talking about it. You're super excited about it. You have the passion, and that's what some people don't have. Do you think that, and I'm sure you've run into this, and we've talked about it on this podcast before, but that there is a guide mentality where you go into a trip and you are the guide, and if they ask you to fish, you're just like, that's not what I'm out here for. I'm out here for you. Right? And you go into this guide mode. Of course, you still like to fish, and there's another mode that you can go into that is a fishing mode. Have you ever seen people that get into guiding because they want to fish, and then they realize, wow, this isn't what I thought. I thought I was going to be the guy with a rod in my hand, and now I'm sitting here watching these people fish. And I've seen people that are not excited about that, and they don't make it in the guide business because that's not what they got in it for. They didn't realize that there is this art to being a fishing guide, and that is not being the angler.
There are so many demands on a guide that are different than going fishing. That's why they have bass guides, because bass guides do fish, and even sea trout guides a lot of times fish. But in our field, whether it's sailfish or bonefish or tarpon or whatever it is, the opportunities are not great enough that you can go around fishing and show your angler how you're going to fight a tarpon while they watch. It's not going to work.
For an hour.
But yeah, I've seen a lot of guys fail because it wasn't what they thought they were getting into. It's really, really challenging. I mean, there are times that, God, wouldn't you like to take the rod away from that guy and show him how to pump and wind? And we pick up another rod. And we'll lift up on the rod and we'll wind down next to the guy just to show him the motions that he needs to be going through. But it's his, and the worst one, I think, and you may agree, you may not, but it sounds like you will. The worst one is when the angler has an opportunity to catch a fish and they just don't get it. Like for you, it's the bonefish or the tarpon 50 feet at 10 o'clock. For us, it might be backlashes dropping back to a fish or not winding when they need to wind or any number of different things that go wrong. It's the guy that the sailfish starts jumping and he's jumping right at you, wind.
And they're just sitting there, mouth agape.
Open. They're so amazed with what they're looking at that everything else is gone from their mind.
Yeah.
And it gets challenging, but
that's part of the fun, though.
Oh,
is
yeah,
it is watching someone be that amazed that they absolutely freeze. They just stop doing everything, and they just don't have enough experience yet to understand how to react in that situation.
Over the years, I've seen several guides that failed or succeeded. Either one, that if the customer lost a fish, they lost the guide's fish, and the guide would be so abusive. You did this, you did that, you lost my fish. I looked for that fish all day and you blew it. Well, the customer already feels bad. His fish of his lifetime got away. And then you degrade him because the fish got away. You always have to come back with a response. Well, they get underneath the boat like that once in a while, and they're just nothing you can do. And yeah, sometimes if you jerk up too hard, something will break. Jerks can't use circle hooks. You just got to kind of just wind with them,
Yeah, yeah. There's always it's always a fine line, but once you understand that, look, getting mad at the guy is only going to result in him going and finding a different guy.
Sure.
You've just totally exploded that relationship. Your relationship is over with that person.
Or worse than that, he goes back to the barbershop in Ohio and he badmouths the whole fishing experience to all of his buddies who've never gone deep sea fishing. And then he was belittled by the guide and they didn't catch anything and it was rough and he got his whole barbershop full of buddies. They're never going to go big game fishing. So,
and on the other hand, if he goes back and he talks to the barbershop or the cocktail party or the people at work. I'm sure you've had it plenty of times where you get this one guy from Ohio and then you start looking at where you're mailing out your letters or where your emails are going or wherever. And all of a sudden you've got like 25 customers in this one little town in Ohio. Why do you think that happens? Because the guy goes and talks to the barbershop and then everybody's like, that sounds really fun. I think I'd like to do that. Can I get that guy's number? And then he calls, and then his friend calls, then his brother-in-law calls, and then all of these people call. So that's a big swing from sending that guy away unhappy and having them never come back to South Florida, or having him bring his family and everyone he knows. And that's really how you develop that clientele.
And what's amazing about that can be the same lost fish, because you should see this sailfish shimmering in the sky and jumping. It was so amazing. It was so thrilling. I forgot to wind. But I'm going back next year because I got to catch that guy sooner or later. Or he was so belittled, it was no longer a great event. So
yeah, and of course there's emotions and stuff like that go into it, especially when tournaments come in. But I think it's interesting that you talked about how fishing has changed, and one of the ways that fishing has changed, and it was happening when I started, but hanging fish on the nail. Oh yeah, that was your social media. People would go down to the docks and they would walk the docks, and whichever fish had the most fish hanging on the nail and the biggest fish hanging on the nail, well, that's obviously where people would be drawn to, and then those people are getting booked the next day, and then it's so a lot of the guides are getting very upset in the older times because they lost that big fish that could have gotten them 5 charters. Yeah. But if they had just been nice to that guy, he was going to be here all week. Yeah. And he would have booked 5 days, right? And it's just kind of an interesting deal. But I want to ask you a couple other questions. So we talked about these marine sanctuaries and different things like that. I'd like to know about what you think as far as the Goliath grouper. Like in your time, you've seen the Goliath grouper be a commercially sought after fish, probably, and the numbers dwindle, and then the numbers really rebound. What's your opinion of our Goliath grouper situation right now?
Well, my first reaction is Goliath groupers are misunderstood, because fishermen only see a Goliath grouper taking advantage of a situation, and that being that a mangrove snapper can no longer swim at full speed because somebody's restraining him with a line or a permit or a snook or whatever it is, and he's an opportunity feeder, so he's going to grab your fish. And it's your fish. It's not his fish. It was on his reef, but it ain't his, it's yours. The truth of the matter is when they cut open a Goliath grouper that hasn't blown its stomach up coming up out of the depths, they eat crabs and lobsters, and I would think that with time they would become a major lionfish enemy, and that they would suck in the lionfish because they're pretty sedentary on the bottom. But the bottom line is that they are not a fish stealer by nature. It's just something that is an opportunity to take advantage of. So they're misunderstood there. The second observation is that there's too many of them. But how many is too many? If there were 3 Goliath groupers on a wreck and they stole 4 fish a day, that's just as a number, and the fishing was slow, people would still be mad at the Goliath groupers. So do you go from 20 to 3, or do you go from 3 to 1, or do you eliminate all the Goliath groupers on wreck A and there's no sense in going to wreck B because they're protected there? It's a really, really tricky program. And I happen to be aware of it because I always try to stay on top of fisheries things. But the scientists had decided that the Goliath grouper had recovered. And I forget exactly what year, whether it was 2010 or 27. I think it was 2010. That we had a really bad freeze. And all the juvenile Goliath groupers in the 10,000 islands on up to the west coast of Florida, they were decimated by this freeze. There were tons of them floating on top of the water. And the scientists immediately put a stop to all discussions about opening up Goliath groupers, because it takes Goliath groupers 5 years to reach maturity to spawn. So they said there'll be no discussion about opening up Goliath groupers for 5 more years. So now we're in a very aggressive discussion again about some kind of Goliath grouper harvest. Goliath grouper is an interesting situation. First, you have to understand the nature of Goliath groupers. In nature, they're eating crabs and lobsters and that type of stuff. Sedentary, easy prey to grab. And when they cut one open, they're full of crabs and lobsters. So the lobster divers has a good beef with too many Goliath groupers. The Goliath groupers that we interact with are reclaiming their mangrove snapper, their permit, their snook, whatever it is that they're stealing off of your line. It's their wreck. It's their fish population. You're trying to steal from them, and they're trying to keep it. But we've reached a point now where it's a big topic of discussion is how to control the Goliath grouper population. And they were on the verge of doing that. It was about 2010, I think it was, that the Goliath grouper population was really healthy, especially out on the reefs. And there were plenty of juveniles in the 10,000 islands and up the west coast of Florida. Then we had this horrendous freeze, and all those juvenile fish were wiped out. And the scientists have determined that it takes 5 years for Goliath grouper to reach maturity to where it can start to spawn. So the scientists said after this freeze, there'll be no talk of harvesting Goliath groupers for 5 years. That 5 years is up now. We're back into heated discussion, and it becomes a question of how do you regulate the Goliath groupers? Take all of them off of Rec A and make Rec B protected, no harvest of Goliath groupers? Or should we set up a harvest that optimally we will harvest 20%? So the scientists have to go down and count them every year and see how many there are, and then we can harvest 20% and control it like snook, where it's, hey, we're seeing a reduction in population, we're going to close it right now? Or what's the best answer? Is it a individual tag where everybody can buy a tag for $50, which goes towards Goliath grouper research, and everybody's only allowed to have one tag apiece? Or do we have a annual quota of 100 Goliath groupers, and when 100 Goliath groupers have been reported harvested, then it's closed? Or there's so many different ways to regulate it, and it needs to be regulated because, as you know, they were almost wiped out was how this all got started. So it's a tough road to hoe. And they do need controlling, but not in my area. I mean, we almost never have an interaction with one.
Really? Yeah. I before 2010, before the freeze there, back in the early 2000s, they were extremely healthy in the Florida Keys. And when I say extremely healthy, I wasn't even going out to the wrecks to see them and see how many there were. I would see them under the bushes when I'm fishing for baby tarpon under the bushes. I'm looking, I can see them. They're under there, and they're swimming along. And so I started thinking, wow, wouldn't somebody that likes to catch a largemouth bass like to catch a 40-pound Goliath grouper on a light rod? And it became like a kind of a thing for me, like on a slow day or a cloudy day when we couldn't see the bonefish or whatever. Well, would you want to – we could even catch them on fly. And, would you want to go over here and maybe try this? And at first it was kind of like some people would be like, no, I don't want to.
And aren't they beautiful?
Yeah, they're beautiful. They fight hard, and almost every time they would cough up these crabs. That's what they would cough up every time. But then after that freeze, just you could scour the bushes with a trolling motor. You could go down the bushes and look, and you'd never see them anymore. They're just starting to come back now. But a lot of people are interested in it, and I wanted your opinion because I know that you've seen a lot of changes where they were, you can see these. You go to the restaurants in the Keys, and you see these pickup trucks full of, on a flatbed truck. There's 5 of them. And then there's a couple hanging, and they were obviously a big target for commercial fishing, and it would be easy. I mean, that would be the easiest commercial fishing you could have. I mean, one shot, you got a 400-pounder, and your day's over, right? Like that would be super, super easy. But a lot of people are interested in it just seems like there's a lot when you pull a permit up and there's 4 of them coming after it. Sure. It seems like there's a lot. There's a lot of discussion about would a tag work? Where you could, like a tarpon tag, you can kill it. You can still get a tarpon kill tag. They only have so many. You pay for it, and the money goes back to tarpon research or preservation or law enforcement in some way, shape, or form. But I just wanted to get your opinion on the Goliath.
No, they need control. There's no doubt about it. And like I say, in Miami, not so much as other places, but they need controls. Something has to be done to some extent.
So recently I've been following you and AB online, and this Kubera snapper fishing that you're doing is something, that's a fish that I don't know anything about. Our worlds just don't, I'm not in the Kubera snapper world for whatever reason. How did this happen for you? Did you find these fish a long time ago? Do you know? I mean, how is this a target for you? Because it seems like the ones that you're catching, I mean, you're catching 6 or 8. Most of them are over 50 pounds. That to me is one of the most incredible fish that we have in this area, because the mangrove snapper, to me, if you can catch a big mangrove snapper, that is a very smart fish that fights really, really hard. The Kubera snapper looks almost exactly like a 50-pound mangrove snapper. So I don't know anything about them. I'd like to know what you're doing to find these fish and catch them.
Well, you bring a lot to the table already. First of all, to recreational fishing, Bob Lewis was targeting groupers, and he didn't want to be bothered by amberjacks. And he decided to try the lobsters to keep the amberjacks from biting. And that's how he started using lobsters to catch Kubera snappers. He went grouper fishing and caught boatloads of Kubera snappers. This was back in the 50s or 60s. And the stories are really cute. He would pull up to a lobster trap, and he would pull the trap and take the lobsters out. And his charter would say, is that your trap? He said, no, I know the owner of the trap. He said, I can help myself. But this is times gone by, and Bob was a great sportsman and fisherman and commercial fisherman, and he's long since passed. But one of his little indiscretions was how he got his lobsters from time to time. But that being said, that's who started everybody's full awareness of the nighttime live lobster Kubera snapper fishing. And then back in the early days, there were a lot of guys that harvested a lot of them, and there were a lot of them were huge, 80, 90, 100 pounds. And over the years, my first Kubera trip was in the fairly early 80s. And I never would have been successful probably without a guide from Tavernier named Lee Robinson. He said he would join me for the night. He would bring the lobsters from Tavernier. He would meet us at, I think we left out Ocean Reef or maybe Garden Cove. But at any rate, he would meet us, and he would bring the lobsters, and we were going to fish for 2 nights with a young man from Tampa, Florida. We went out, and we went to this wreck off of Ocean Reef, and we caught several fish. They didn't bite till after midnight, but we caught several. And the next night, Lee didn't go with us, and we were actually using dead lobsters. The customer caught 5 or 6, and he says, here, now you catch one. And I went 4 hours without a bite. And I said, hey, come on, you got to catch one more before the sun comes up, and gave him back the rod, and he caught one on the first drift. And by the time he landed it, the sun was coming up, and it was over with. But I've been running Kubera trips ever since. And I've taken a hiatus because it's very expensive. You have to buy the bait or pay somebody to catch you the bait. And you have a long run, and you lose a lot of hooks and a lot of sinkers. And you can't use light hooks because they'll straighten them out. And so there was a lot of expense involved. It cost the customer a lot of money. And when you would do it and not catch any fish, I take a lot of responsibility for that. And, guys trusted me to put them on the fish. And when they didn't bite there, we would go look elsewhere for them, and we couldn't find them on the other spots. So I get, oh, boy, this is the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to go. And then, oh, boy, that was a bad year. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. But the bottom line is that it had its ups and its downs. The last few years, there's been a lot of pressure on them. And every time I go, I say, God, I don't know how they're going to take this pressure. I mean, they're there to spawn. They're full of eggs. And there's all these. The last night we fished was Friday night. There were 15 boats there. And we're all fishing one wreck. And the wreck is what, maybe 150 feet long and 50 feet wide. And there's 15 boats there. And if you hook them and they run into the wreck and they cut you off, do they survive or do they get tied to the wreck? I think almost all of them survive that do that because I know that they can wear through 125-pound mono pretty good, and that's the heaviest thing they're hooked on. But the bottom line is they're really getting beat up by having 15 boats there. I can remember going there night after night and being the only boat there. And just on the mini season we went, and there were 6 boats there. And then we went Wednesday night, and there were 6 or 8 boats there. And by Friday night, there were 15 boats. How many boats were there on Saturday night when guys had all day to go get their lobsters and rig their rods? And that's why I wouldn't go Saturday night. It was just too much odds of too many boats to even be there. I'm really done Cabera snapper fishing for the year. We fished Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and we fished one night during the mini season, and I'll wrap it up until next year. But, God, was it good this year. We had a fish that we estimated at 100 pounds. Here's a good one for you. 2 nights we harvested 2 snappers a night because the guys wanted fish to eat. And we've always believed that if they were under 40 pounds, they were pretty well safe to eat. And I met a guy who swears that there's never been a recorded case of ciguatera poisoning in a Cabera snapper because they eat mostly lobsters. But I know that they eat yellowtails and mangroves and stuff, so in their normal realm, they eat everything that could give them ciguatera poisoning. But the bottom line is we've never harvested a lot. We've kept a few world's records, and once in a while we'll keep 1 or 2 to eat when they're smaller ones. So Friday night we kept 2 because they wanted to eat them. And we estimated them at 20 to 25 pounds. And we got back to we kept 2 the night before, and we kept 2 this time. And the night before we didn't weigh them. And I says, Avy, bring over the boga grip. So he gets the boga grip, and he comes over, and he hangs them up on the scale. The first one, this is the one we thought was 25 pounds or so, 37 pounds. The 20-pounder, 33 pounds. So how much did our 70-pounder weigh, and how much did our 100-pounder weigh if we were that far off on the smaller ones? But it really blew our mind. We were so far off on what they weighed. And these were so much smaller than a lot of the ones we caught. So
wow, that's an incredible thing. That fish is just a that has to be one of the toughest fish to catch. I mean, would we even be catching them if he hadn't figured out the lobster thing?
Well, there are throughout the year there are periodic catches. We catch them snook fishing and get them a cut. They're usually 15, 20 pounds. They catch them in all the inlets. They catch them mutton snapper fishing. If they were not targeted with lobsters, there would still be a fair amount of them caught because guys would get their yellowtails eaten at night especially, and they would drop down a live yellowtail and they'd catch Cabera snappers. We catch Cabera snappers in the Bahamas on live yellowtails all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you like that Bahamas fishing. I saw a lot of that on your website. You still going over there quite a bit?
Yeah, we don't go as much because it's not as good as it used to be, but it's still an awful lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a couple other things. The swordfish on fly, the world record that you got.
I didn't got. I was privileged to observe. I have a client named Marty Roski. He's got over 450 world's records.
He frequents Key West also.
Yes, he does. And has more than twice as many world's records as anybody else in the world has ever had. And he's devoted to it, and they range from huge sharks to minimum size freshwater fish and stuff, everything in between. But his grandfather was a sword fisherman in Cuba, and his son wanted to go try to catch a swordfish out here at night. So we jumped on his boat one night with Marty and his son Martini, and we went out, and in the course of the evening, we finally caught a swordfish and headed for home. And when he had observed how we fished at night with the hydroglow light in the water and everything else, he says, we should be able to do that. We should be able to catch one on fly. And I said, well, it would certainly be worth a try. I'm game to try anything. So then the next time we were going, he said, I'm going to bring my fly rod. Maybe we'll give it a try. So he brought his fly rod, and his brother caught one, and he caught one, and we went home, and the fly rod never came out of the rack. And he said, bam, we blew it. We should have tried to fly tonight. I said, yeah, we'll have to do it again. So the next time, he says, this time we're going to catch one on fly. So his son came along with us, Martini, and I put out a rigged squid on a float way away from the boat, and I put out a live blue runner on a float quite a ways from the boat. We hung a hydroglow fish light in the water, the old original long fluorescent tube, all green. And Marty rigs his own fly rod, ties his own leaders up, ties his own fly. And I says, we got these little Siloom lunker lights. They're just a little bitty inch or so long and a 16th or an eighth of an inch in diameter. Let's tie that in the fly. It was a 2-hook fly. So there was a piece of mono in between the two hooks, covered up with feathers, but we cleared away the feathers enough so we could tie this lunker light inside the fly. And now he's rigged his rod, he's tied his leader, he's tied his own fly. We're drifting, and he's casting out. You're only allowed to have 120 line off the reel, 120 feet of line off the reel when you're fly fishing. So he casts the fly, a sinking fly line. He lets it sink. He floats it out to 120 feet. He's got a knot, a marker of wax thread tied around his line so he can feel when he's reached the maximum. And then he strips the fly and he floats it back, and he strips the fly and he floats it back. He strips the fly and he floats it back, and then he strips it all the way into the boat and he casts it again. He says, I don't want anybody to think I'm not casting, because he sticks very strictly to the rules in everything he does. So he strips it all the way in and he does it again, and he's doing it for about an hour. And he gets a good solid strike, and the rod's jerking and got the fish tight, and it comes off. Well, it was probably a barracuda or a shark or something, maybe a dolphin, who knows. But he goes back to fishing. And his son's asleep, and the two buoys with the swordfish baits are out there. And he's working his fly, and, he's got him on again. So as soon as he hooks it, the fish runs toward the bow of his 35-foot cabo. So the boat has to be maneuvered for him to fight the fish. And I run up to the helm, which is up 3 steps and across the salon. And he says, hold on, don't do anything. The fish had turned away from the boat and back towards the boat. So he's gaining line. So I walked back down in the cockpit with him because the fish is coming. And I figured, okay, so he's got a shark on or something. And he fights it for about an hour. I never went back up to the helm. Never touched the helm the whole fight. And he's fighting it. And all I said when I saw it was, I screamed at the top of my lungs, it's got a bill. That's all I could think of to say. And he caught this 46-inch swordfish. I pulled it in the boat. We measured it. We took several photographs, and we let it go because you had to be 47 inches to keep it. And that's from the tip of the lower jaw to the fork of the tail. So we turned it loose, and we high-fived it and celebrated, and finally woke his son up, who slept through the whole thing, tried over and over again to wake him up, but he was just completely out. And then his son caught one on the bait, and we went home. But
wow.
You say I caught, or all I did was take him to where we always swordfished and suggest he put the lunker light in.
Yeah.
To rig his own rod, tie his own leader, tie his own fly, and then do all the casts and catch the fish from a dead boat.
Wow.
Has to be the greatest angling event in the history of fishing. And I was privileged enough to watch.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, he is definitely, he's done so much. I mean, you go through the record book, and they're just record upon record. I know he's done a bunch with Robert Trossett, who was also on this podcast, and he told some interesting stories.
Okay, back from technical difficulties. We had the batteries go out. I've never had a battery go out. I've never had a card go out, but I think that Bouncer talks too much. Or maybe I talk too much for this one, but one or the other. All right, so the greatest angling accomplishment. Mark, he has done so much. All these, Robert Trossett was telling me about some different records that he had gotten as well. And, I mean, he's certainly an expert fisherman to the highest degree.
But you know what? Not only is he a great angler, but he's got little Mitzi flat skiff, or maybe he traded on something. He's got a little flat skiff. He's got a 35-foot cabo. He fishes on my 33-foot dusky sometimes. He fishes with guides all over the world as the angler. But then he takes his wife on the flats boat or on the cabo, and he guides her to hundreds of world's records on fly and bait and everything else. He takes his son, who's got the second most world's records in the world, to hundreds of world's records. And so many of them are just he and his son on the boat, or he and his wife and his son. And then he goes to Cuba and he lectures fishing clubs or whatever they are, gatherings, on the value of using circle hooks for billfish and how to use circle hooks for billfish. And then he goes to Cuba and he talks about the value of flats fish and how to protect the flats fish so they'll be there for years to come. He writes magazine articles in Spanish for Miami magazines on the importance of catch and release and circle hooks and proper releasing of your fish and marine reserves in the Spanish language, so that the Cuban and Central American, Latin American population is exposed to the same thing that you and I are in English, because it's a whole different group of people that some of them don't communicate in English. And he shares all that knowledge. He's on a board of directors at a college up in the Midwest someplace, and he goes to meetings there all the time. He speaks on marine reserves all over South Florida. He speaks on fishing all over the country to different organizations. He's on the board of directors of the IGFA. The guy doesn't just take from the industry, but he gives back equally or more. He's just a superhuman being.
Yeah.
You're so lucky to have him be a fisherman instead of a pool shooter or something.
That's amazing. He has given a lot to the industry. I didn't know all the boards and stuff that he was on, or all the work that he's doing in Cuba. That's crazy. He's quite a guy. So let me ask you a couple other things. What's your relationship with bananas?
Absolutely love them. Oh, God, there's nothing better than a banana that's just got little brown spots on it, and it's not hard, but it's not mushy. And then banana nut muffins, they're just the best. But they have to be in the system long enough to digest before the fishing trip. You have to digest them before the fishing trip. So a banana in the evening after a good day of fishing is a great thing. Blown out, let me get to the banana nut muffin as quick as I can, because I have been putting it off for days. But don't be eating no bananas on the boat. Don't bring any banana boat sunscreen. The honest to goodness truth, and I swear this to all that I can swear on, I got the bananas out of the Fruit of the Loom logo. I had two customers fish with me the last Wednesday of every month. One of them, Sandy, went to Spain for the month of November, so Don brought Jack on the boat. And I netted a bunch of pilchards, went out to a wreck, put 2 baits on the bottom, 2 baits on top, and I'm chumming with live pilchards, and we can't buy a bite. My good best friend, Dennis Forgione, pulls up next to us in his dusky, exact mountain to mine, caught his bait in the same place, uses the same pen fishing tackle I do, anchors up next to me, and I said, I tried to tell you not to anchor here. There's nothing biting. He baits a hook. He throws it out. And he's got a kingfish on. Kingfish, bonita, kingfish, bonita. Drops a bait down the yellowtails, muttons, kingfish, bonitas, yellowtails, muttons. And we're not getting a bite. And I pulled the anchor, went around on the other side of Dennis, because we must have been too close to the wreck. And he's over there, kingfish, bonita, mutton, yellowtail, mutton, kingfish, yellow. And we can't get a bite. I slap my hand down on the backrest of the bench in the back of the boat. Somebody on here's got to be wearing Fruit of the Loom. And the guy, Jack's sitting there. He fires up like a Polaris missile, swings around, hands on his hips. What would you say if I was the vice president in charge of sales for Fruit of the Loom? I says, you ought to take the bananas out of your logo, because they got to be bad for business, because nobody will wear them. He was the vice president in charge of sales for Fruit of the Loom. And in less than a year, the bananas were gone from the Fruit of the Loom logo, promotions, and everything else. So.
That's incredible. Did you? I had read one time that you cut somebody's Fruit of the Loom logo out of their underwear.
It used to be a tradition on my boat to go around and cut the labels out of T-shirts. And on a couple of occasions, young customers on the boat, they would grab their buddies back in their shorts and give them a wedgie and pull out on their pants. Yep, it's a Fruit of the Loom, and grab a knife and cut it off. The whole back of their brief should be cut off. We had a lot of laughs. But I had a disaster this summer. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know what to do.
What?
We're out there sword fishing, and we make the first drop, and we catch a 180-pounder, and we put it in the boat. And we run back down south, and we make a drop, and we hook up, and we catch a 180-pounder, and we tag it and release it. And we're running back down to set up again. I just slow the boat down. Amy says, "You're not going to believe it when you look up at the bow of the boat." I says, "What's that?" And I look up there, and there's a guy with a great big giant tube of banana boat sunscreen, and he's putting it on. And I says, "Man, you got to throw that thing overboard. That's bad luck. I don't know how we pulled this off. You must have it buried in the bottom of your backpack in the bottom of the bilge." And I talked him into throwing it overboard. We never got another bite all day.
Uh-oh.
So the next day, I get to the boat, and the customers got there before I did. And they got 2 tubes of banana boat on my seat, and they're lathering up. And I got to see what happened yesterday, so didn't say a word. We go out there. We caught 5 sailfish and a shark, and the guys hadn't even been to bed yet. They'd been partying all night. So we were back at the dock before noon with 5 sailfish and a shark and 2 tubes of banana boat. They went out the next day with their banana boat, and we caught some tarpon. And the guy says, "I never caught a snook. I'd love to eat one." I made 1 pass, and we caught a slot-sized snook and big Jack Crevalles. So I'm in a dilemma about these bananas.
Are you rethinking?
No, I'm sticking to the rules. Don't want to press my luck.
That's so funny. I have another friend who believes the opposite, that he thinks the no banana thing is just ridiculous. And so he has had a banana on his boat for over 3,000 charters. I have a picture of him. I'll have to send it to you. He is netting a big redfish. He's a guide in Louisiana. So it'd be hard to miss there because the red fishing is the best in the world. But he's netting this giant redfish, and in the other hand, he has a banana.
Well, Bob Branham and I have been friends for centuries. And he's a flats guy, as you know.
I know.
And he was tarpon fishing in Government Cut. And I was tarpon fishing in Government Cut, and he's fighting, his customers are fighting a fish, and we're drifting by him, and he's eating a banana. And Nick Stanzik loves to send me pictures where he's got a swordfish on the boat, and he's eating a banana, and Tony DeJulian throws it at me all the time, too. So it gets to superstitions. If you and I were going fishing tomorrow, we were going to go vertical jigging for groupers. And I gave you a vertical jig, and I says, "Here, you try this jig. We have spent hundreds of hours, and we can't get a bite on this vertical jig. Give it a try." Well, in 5 minutes, you'd be drinking a beer, and the vertical jig would be hanging from the rod tip. Conversely, if I gave you a vertical jig, and I said, "We have caught a grouper over 20 pounds. Every day we've used this vertical jig." An hour later, you'd still be working as hard as you could if you hadn't already caught a grouper, because you knew that you couldn't break this spell, and you knew that groupers like this jig. Well, superstitions work on the same principle. If I believe that bananas on my boat are bad luck, and I see a guy with a banana or a banana boat or Fruit Loom, now, instead of my brain being fully dialed into how to get a fish to bite, my brain is half dialed into, it's all about the banana. I got to get rid of that banana. That banana is the problem, instead of my brain always being 100% how to catch a fish. And that's how superstitions work. They divert you from being focused on your job. So if mine's bananas and number 13 on my boat, all my rod holders are numbered. And it goes 12, 12.9, 14. Because we ain't going to have no 13 on my boat.
12.9. That's awesome. You also have numbers on your boat, right?
Yeah, it's very great for communications. I went to Cozumel, Mexico, ran a boat down from Miami, went to Cozumel, Mexico on a charter by Mexicans. So we're out there fishing. You got seaweed on the left short. There's a sailfish on the right short. There's a dolphin on the left long. And the mate knows what I'm saying, but the customers don't understand what's going on. So the one customer comes up on the bridge and he says, "We're having a communication problem. In all of our fishing here, we're only allowed to fish 4 lines. So let's make them 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody on this boat can learn 1, 2, 3, 4. And if push came to shove, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's no more confusion about which line to run to. Figuring out what's there, we're all pretty good fishermen." So, okay, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. Worked like a champ. Come back to Miami. It's a couple years later, I'm fishing. I'm anchored up. I got 2 spinning rods out flat, 2 Penn International stand-up rods on the bottom. And the port bottom rod gets hit. And I holler, fish on the bottom over there. And the guy runs over and picks up the spinning rod. No, not that one, the other one. He puts the spinning rod down, goes to the other side of the boat, picks up the other spinning rod. No, the other one. And he picks up the wrong bottom rod, and by the time he got to the right rod, the fish was gone. So that night when I got in from fishing, I went right into the marine store, and I bought numbers, and I numbered all the rod holders. And my rod holders have been numbered ever since.
Big numbers. I mean, these are not little numbers. They're I can see them on the...
It's so funny. You've been out fishing for 6 hours, and you say there's a bite on number 3, and the guy goes, where's number 3? And all of his buddies go, what the hell's wrong with you? You're blind. But it's so it's so good for. See, we try to have our customers. Bear in mind that for 20 years, I offshore fished without a mate. I did everything. So I always had my customers very involved in what I was doing. So it was really easy if you said, can you wind in number 3? It's got seaweed on it. And they knew exactly which rod it was. Very difficult when you tried to tell a customer that there's a sailfish on the long kite.
Right.
And they haven't figured out what the hell you're doing with that kite yet. But if you tell them there's a sailfish eating number 4, pick it up, walk to the motors, wait till it starts to pull, and then wind, it's very easy for them to hook their own fish. So we number everything. It makes life much easier.
It's a great idea.
And I get ridiculed by people all the time. I say, hey, my people know where to go when they get a bite. Yours don't.
That's right. Besides that, you've been doing it for 52 years. I think you might have learned something along the way.
Yeah, but it still looks hokey compared to nice, clean fiberglass. So.
Yeah, everybody's got their thing.
Yep.
That's your thing, that and bananas. So at this point in your career, what's important to you?
What's important? That my people, which has changed for me a lot, that my people have a good time is numero uno. And that I share the responsibility for preserving sport fishing is every bit as important as my charter fishing. If I can get the word out to people that they need to use circle hooks, they need to leave their fish in the water when they're going to release them, that they need to only keep what they're going to eat, not try to feed the whole neighborhood, not try to fertilize their plants. Anything they can do to preserve sport fishing, I promote it. Whether it's like yesterday, we took some inner city kids fishing. They'd never been on a boat in their life. They had an absolute ball. We didn't even have good fishing, but they had a ball. And if you take a kid fishing and they enjoy it, and it gets their head into being out of doors instead of in a computer, they'll have more appreciation for the outdoors. And if they appreciate the outdoors, they'll protect it. Who's the best spokesman for maintaining natural preserves and maintaining populations of wildlife? Hunters. Who's got to be the steward for the preservation of fishing and fish habitat? It's fishermen, because they're the user group. They see it every day. To me, it's the most ridiculous thing in the world is for corporation people to lecture boaters about being careful not to harm manatees. We live to see a manatee on a regular basis. We may have it named, and it's our friend. We're the last ones that are going to threaten it. To lecture us about manatees or declining fisheries is preaching to the choir. But we have to preach to other people that they need to get on board on what's best for the future of sport fishing.
And that is getting more and more people involved in the sport, right?
You got it.
And seeing them get involved in a positive way where like we talked about before, when they get involved, they're having a great experience and they really want to repeat that experience over and over again.
No doubt about it. Whether it's catching fish watching frigate birds or porpoises or turtles or whatever comes with being outdoors. It's all important.
All right. Well, Bouncer, thank you for sitting down with me. I loved your stories.
You're not going to wrap this up already.
I was thinking, do you have something else to talk about? I was thinking we've gone for a while. It's been about an hour and a half. This will not be the last time. I enjoyed it very much.
We'll save some stories for next time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as I enjoyed sitting down with Bouncer. What a great guy, and what great stories, and what an incredibly adventuresome life to be able to live through all of that in Miami, live through the Mariel boat lift and the riots and all the good times and bad, all the things he's seen in his lifetime of guiding anglers. Bouncer, you are a true legend. You did not disappoint, and I really, really appreciate you sitting down with me. Thank you so much. We have a couple of new things going on. You can go to the dedicated podcast website, go to tomrowlandpodcast.com, and we also have a book club going on there. You can join that. We read a book about every 2 weeks, and most of the books that are up there have been referred to the podcast by one of the guests that we've had on. It's a book that was profound in their life, something that they either like or it's the most gifted book. Some of them we talked about on the podcast, some of them we didn't. But anyway, that's where it is, the book club. And if you buy through the website there, it'll take you to your own Amazon account, and we are an Amazon affiliate. So if you want to support the podcast like that, that'd be great to buy those books right through the website, tomrowlandpodcast.com. All right, until next week, see you.